I was setting the table for dinner, the clink of cutlery and soft hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet kitchen, when something caught my eye. It wasn't the usual calm of our routine, it was the subtle shift in Blair's demeanor. Just that afternoon, I'd seen her in the hallway, pausing for a moment longer than necessary, her eyes darting toward the living room as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. I dismissed it at the time, chalking it up to a fleeting thought or a stray worry. But tonight, as I arranged the plates, the memory surged back, stirring an uneasy knot in my chest. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second amplifying my growing anxiety. I remembered the exact moment. Blair, in the living room, leaning casually against the doorframe. She was holding her phone with a practiced nonchalance, her lips pressed into a thin line as she scrolled through messages. Something about the way she threw on her cardigan, as if shielding herself from more than just a chill, felt off. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it pricked at the edge of my consciousness like a whisper of a secret too heavy to keep. I forced myself to focus on the simple task at hand, yet my mind kept replaying that fleeting moment. The silence was punctuated only by my racing thoughts and the soft rustle of Blair's steps as she moved about the room. The delicate hum of our home, usually a comfort, now seemed like a stage set for something sinister. I tried to convince myself that perhaps I was overthinking, a product of my own insecurities, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fabric of our life was fraying. "Timothy, can you pass me the salt?" Blair's voice snapped me back to the present, light and unsuspecting. Her tone, while sweet, carried an undercurrent of distraction that made my heart thud faster. I handed her the salt, noticing the slight tremor in her hands. There was something in her eyes, a fleeting glimpse of guilt or perhaps fear, that made my pulse quicken. After dinner, as Blair retreated to the study claiming she needed to answer an urgent email, I couldn't help but linger in the quiet hall. I remembered how, earlier that day, her phone screen had lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Jason. A chill crept along my spine as I recalled the way she'd quickly threw off her pretense of casual conversation whenever his name came up in our discussions. It was a small detail, easily dismissed by any rational mind, yet it now loomed large in the growing darkness of my thoughts. I stood there, caught between disbelief and dread, piecing together fragments of a story that had never been fully told. My heart pounded in my ears as I realized that this wasn't just about an offhand glance or a poorly timed phone call. It was the first undeniable sign that something was terribly wrong. And as I listened to the silent hum of our once familiar home, I knew with a sinking certainty that this night was just the beginning of a story I never wanted to live. The moment I discovered the hidden truth, everything shifted. I sat in the study long after Blair's urgent email had taken her away, my hands trembling as I reached for her phone on the desk. I rationalized that I'd simply glance at it to check for a missed call, an innocent act. But as I scrolled through the messages, the screen illuminated a web of conversations I was never meant to see. One thread in particular caught my eye, a series of texts between Blair and Jason. The words danced in front of me, each message dripping with intimacy and secret longing. They planned rendezvous, shared private jokes, and even exchanged photos that left little doubt. I felt the room spin as I realized the betrayal was not a fleeting mistake, but a calculated affair. My heart pounded in a rhythm that matched the relentless tapping of my fingers on the cold, hard surface of the desk. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The messages were candid, laced with a familiarity that had no place in our marriage. "I wish we could steal another moment," one message read, and my chest tightened as I recognized the tone Blair reserved only for our most tender moments, now twisted into something dangerous. My inner turmoil roared to life, a cacophony of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaky as I paced the room. The evidence was irrefutable. Every word confirmed what my gut had been screaming all along. I remembered the odd way Blair had thrown on her cardigan, as if warding off more than just a chill, and how she'd clutched her phone a little too tightly when I glanced her way. It was all there, now laid bare on a digital canvas of deceit. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for betrayal. I walked over to the window and peered out into the dark street, where neon signs flickered and the distant hum of the city underscored my isolation. The cool night air did nothing to calm the fire raging inside me. I felt as though I was simultaneously drowning in heartbreak and ablaze with righteous fury. A surge of conflicted emotions swept over me. I recalled our happier times, the laughter we once shared, and the promises we made. But those memories were now tainted, twisted into reminders of what had been lost. I sank onto the edge of the sofa, the evidence still glowing on the screen in my trembling hands. I muttered to myself, "How could you, Blair? How could you betray me like this?" The question hung in the silence, unanswered, as if the very walls of our home had absorbed the weight of my agony. Just then, a soft creak echoed from the hallway. My pulse leapt. Was Blair coming back? Or was it someone else? I clutched the phone tighter, dread seeping into every pore. In that heart-stopping moment, I realized that my discovery was not just about the betrayal. It was the catalyst for a decision I had long avoided. As the footsteps neared, each step resonating like a countdown to the inevitable confrontation, I knew that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even begin to fathom. The moment I stepped into the living room, my heart pounded so fiercely I was sure Blair could hear it, even if she hadn't. The silence in the house was a tangible, suffocating presence that urged me forward. I found her in the study, her eyes darting nervously between the glowing computer screen and the darkened window. She froze as I entered, a look of shock instantly replacing whatever pretense she'd clung to moments before. "Blair, we need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside me. The room, usually a haven of calm, now felt like a battleground. The soft hum of the computer and the distant thrum of traffic outside faded into insignificance against the weight of my accusation. Her hand trembled as she slowly put the phone down. "Timothy, she began, but I cut her off before she could string together another feeble excuse. "Don't. Just sit down," I ordered, gesturing toward the sofa with a bitter edge in my tone. I couldn't let her hide behind silence any longer. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Blair sank onto the sofa, her eyes locked on the floor, as if she were trying to vanish from my sight. "What is it you want to know?" Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked with fear and uncertainty. I took a deep breath, struggling to maintain control as the dam of pent-up anger broke open. "I know about Jason. I saw the messages on your phone. All the lies. The secret rendezvous. The way you threw on that cardigan like you were hiding something more than just a chill. Everything screams betrayal, Blair." Each word hit like a hammer blow, shattering the fragile remnants of our shared past. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she was silent, a deer caught in the headlights. "Timothy, I didn't think you'd," she stammered, searching desperately for a lifeline in a sea of crumbling trust. "Didn't think I'd what?" I snapped, rising from my seat so abruptly that the sound of my movement filled the room. "Didn't think I'd find out that you've been stealing moments away with my best friend? That you've been living a lie behind my back?" My voice trembled with both fury and heartbreak as I continued, every little detail, every secret smile, every hushed conversation, it all adds up. "You betrayed me in the worst way possible." The intensity in the room was overwhelming. I could see the desperation in her eyes, a raw fear that spoke louder than any excuse. Her hands clenched and unclenched, her skin pale under the harsh glare of the overhead light. "Timothy, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the strain of guilt and regret. "I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened." "Happened?" I echoed, incredulous, each syllable laced with disbelief and sorrow. "I trusted you, Blair. I trusted you with everything. My heart, my life, my soul. And you threw it all away for what? A fleeting thrill? A careless mistake." My words echoed off the walls as if demanding an answer that could never come. Blair's lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. I could see the tears beginning to glisten in the corners of her eyes, but she said nothing more. The silence stretched on, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths and shattered dreams. Every moment felt interminable, a silent countdown to the inevitable collapse of everything we once held dear. I took a step closer, my eyes boring into hers, demanding a confession. "How long, Blair? How long have you been lying to me?" I asked, my tone a mixture of anger and desperate hurt. She hesitated, swallowing hard as if the very act of speaking the truth would tear her apart. Finally, in a voice barely audible, she said, "It started a few months ago. I never meant for it to hurt you." The admission, weak and broken, did nothing to calm the raging inferno inside me. Instead, it ignited a final surge of resolve. The betrayal wasn't just a crack in the foundation of our marriage. It was a chasm too wide to bridge. I felt as though every moment of my life had been building to this point, each small suspicion now exploding into a painful clarity. "I don't want to hear any more excuses," I said, my voice steady despite the tumult within. "You made your choice, Blair. And now, you need to face the consequences." The air between us was charged with an electric mix of sorrow, anger, and inevitability. I looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time, noting every detail: the faded photographs on the mantel, the familiar couch that now felt like a monument to broken promises. Everything screamed that nothing would ever be the same. Taking one final, resolute breath, I fixed my gaze on her, my words final and unyielding. "Pack your things, Blair. I want you out of this house. This scandal, your betrayal, it's over here. And I refuse to let it destroy any more of what's left of me." The declaration hung in the air, an irrevocable command that echoed through the silence. In that moment, as the sound of her quiet, trembling footsteps began to gather the remnants of a shared life, I knew that nothing could ever undo the pain of that betrayal. The house, our home, had become a witness to the end of a chapter I'd once believed was unbreakable. I sank into the silence of the now empty living room, the echo of Blair's footsteps lingering like a ghost in every corner. The confrontation had ended, but the shock of her explanation, half tears, half whispered regrets, continued to reverberate in my ears. I stood alone amid the ruins of our shared life, struggling to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the raw, vulnerable confession that had shattered my illusion of permanence. The house, which once pulsed with the warmth of our connection, now felt cold and cavernous. I wandered from room to room as if in a trance, each familiar space morphing into a stark reminder of everything lost. I passed by our bedroom, where the scent of lavender still clung to the pillows, and I felt a pang of remorse for the love that had once been so vibrant. How could something so beautiful turn into a betrayal of this magnitude? How had we come to this moment? I remembered Blair's explanation, her desperate, halting words that spilled out like a confession without a clear motive. She had tried to justify her actions, murmuring that she felt trapped, suffocated by the routines that once comforted her. Her voice had trembled with a mix of regret and helplessness as she recounted moments of loneliness, moments when she had felt invisible in the glare of my expectations. The more she spoke, the more I realized that the betrayal wasn't born solely of malice but was also entangled with her own internal struggles. Yet, understanding did little to ease the ache in my heart. I sat down heavily on the sofa, the fabric rough beneath my fingertips, and let the flood of memories wash over me. I thought back to the early days of our courtship, when every touch, every whispered secret felt like a promise of an endless future. The echoes of laughter in our living room, the tender glances exchanged over late-night conversations, all these were now tainted by the weight of betrayal. I couldn't help but question my own role in the unraveling of what we once had. Had I been so blinded by my own complacency that I missed the subtle signs? Was my love not enough to see her through her pain? As the minutes turned to hours, I found myself oscillating between a burning anger and a deep, paralyzing sadness. I raged against the injustice of it all, against the idea that trust, so carefully nurtured over the years, could be so easily shattered. Yet, there was also a numb acceptance creeping in, as if part of me had resigned itself to the truth that nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't ignore the reality. The vibrant, messy tapestry of our marriage had unraveled, thread by painful thread, leaving behind only the tattered remnants of what once was. In that quiet solitude, self-doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps I had somehow failed Blair, that I had not been enough to hold her together when she needed me most. The thought stung, a cruel reminder that love isn't always sufficient to ward off the storms of inner turmoil. I questioned every decision, every missed sign, each moment I might have done something differently. But even as these thoughts swirled, a small, stubborn part of me clung to the idea that this pain might eventually lead to something new, a chance for renewal, however distant it seemed. I moved to the window and watched as the city outside continued its indifferent rhythm. Neon lights flickered against the night sky, and distant sounds of traffic blended into a lullaby of urban isolation. The view was a stark contrast to the chaos inside me, a reminder that life, for all its cruelty, still marched forward regardless of personal tragedies. It was in that moment I realized that while the scars of betrayal would not heal overnight, they might eventually fade into the backdrop of a life rebuilt on the ruins of the past. I began to methodically gather my scattered thoughts, trying to anchor myself amidst the storm of regret and sorrow. I pulled out an old photo album from a dusty shelf, its pages filled with snapshots of better days. Smiles that now seemed too fragile to touch the harshness of reality. Each photograph was a relic of a time when I believed in forever, when our love was an unassailable fortress. Now, that fortress lay in ruins, and I was left to sift through the debris, trying to salvage memories without drowning in them. But the quiet was deceptive. Even as I attempted to reflect, the anxiety of the unknown gnawed at the edges of my resolve. I knew that the emotional scars would be a constant companion, a reminder of how easily trust could be betrayed. The loneliness was palpable, a weight that pressed against my chest with every slow, measured breath. And yet, amidst the despair, there was a spark, a glimmer of determination that insisted I couldn't remain mired in this pain forever. I realized that, in accepting the end of our marriage, I was also accepting the possibility of a future that wasn't defined solely by betrayal and regret. The path forward was murky, lined with emotional landmines and steep slopes of self-doubt, but it was a path I had to walk alone. The finality of Blair's departure from the house signified more than just the end of a relationship. It marked the beginning of an uncertain journey toward rediscovery, a journey where every step would be haunted by the echoes of what once was. As I closed the photo album and set it aside, a heavy silence enveloped the room. I whispered into the darkness, "I must learn to live with this emptiness." The words were barely audible, lost amidst the rustling of leaves outside and the distant hum of life beyond my shattered haven. In that lingering moment of introspection, a single disquieting thought took root. The scars of this betrayal were deep, and healing them would be a long, uncertain process. And as I stared into the mirror, half expecting to see the ghost of the man I used to be, I knew that the battle for my heart had only just begun. The morning after the night of reckoning, I woke with a resolve that burned away the remnants of despair. I stared out the window as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the empty room, a room that was no longer a prison of broken promises, but a blank canvas waiting for renewal. The betrayal had cut deep, but as I sipped my coffee, a quiet determination began to replace the agony. Today was the day I would take back control of my life. Without hesitation, I logged into my bank account and initiated the process to file for divorce. The cold, decisive act of blocking our joint bank accounts felt like severing the final ties to a shared past that had been drenched in deceit. Every click on the screen was a step toward reclaiming my identity, a clear signal that I was no longer tethered to the pain Blair had left behind. I knew there would be backlash, legal battles, and emotional scars that might take years to heal, but I was done with living in the shadow of betrayal. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in rebuilding what I had lost. I reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in months, inviting them over for long overdue conversations that slowly chipped away at the silence in my heart. Our gatherings were raw and unscripted, filled with laughter, honest tears, and the kind of understanding that only comes from shared vulnerability. Each reunion was a reminder that I was not defined solely by my marriage, but by the multifaceted person I was always meant to be. I also dusted off my old hobbies: guitar, photography, even the neglected canvases that had once borne the weight of my creative urges. With trembling fingers, I strummed familiar chords, each note a small act of defiance against the sorrow that had tried to consume me. I ventured out with my camera, capturing the ordinary beauty of life. The way the autumn light filtered through the trees in the park, the candid smiles of strangers on a bustling street, the raw emotions of the city at dusk. These moments, though simple, began to stitch together the frayed edges of my spirit. At home, I transformed the space that had witnessed our unraveling. I painted the living room in a warm, inviting hue, a stark contrast to the sterile tones that had marked the aftermath of our confrontation. I rearranged the furniture, creating cozy nooks for reading and reflection, and even added a few personal touches that celebrated the man I was rediscovering. Each brushstroke and every new piece of decor was a declaration. This was my sanctuary now, a place that belonged to me and only me. Yet, the ghosts of betrayal were not easily exorcised. There were long evenings when the silence felt heavy, when memories of Blair's tear-streaked confession and the taste of shattered trust mingled in the quiet. In those moments, I would sit by the window, the cool breeze whispering promises of tomorrow, and remind myself that every scar was proof of survival. I allowed myself to feel the pain, its sharp edges and lingering ache, but I also recognized that it was paving the way for a future unburdened by past mistakes. One evening, after a particularly invigorating session with my guitar and a heartfelt conversation with an old friend, I found myself standing before a mirror. I looked into my own eyes and saw not the man broken by betrayal, but someone emerging with quiet strength. In that reflective moment, I experienced an epiphany. The end of my marriage was not merely a loss, but a necessary ending that heralded a new beginning. I had been given a chance to rebuild, to rediscover passions and relationships that had long been neglected. The road ahead promised challenges, legal battles, the complexities of starting over, and the slow process of mending a heart that had been so deeply scarred. Yet, I felt a spark of hope flicker inside me, a determination to reclaim every bit of who I was. I realized that while the pain of betrayal would linger like shadows in the recesses of my mind, it would not define the rest of my journey. As I closed the door on the past and stepped out into the cool night, I carried with me the bittersweet lessons of love and loss. With each step on the pavement, under the indifferent glow of streetlights, I embraced the truth that endings are but a prelude to new beginnings. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also set me free. And in that liberation, I finally saw the promise of a future where I could be whole again. A future built on resilience, self-discovery, and the unyielding hope of tomorrow.